Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lyric Winnick, President of the BCC PTSA, joined by Devlin Orlin, President of the School-Wide SGA. Last June, an Instagram account appeared called Survivors at BCC. It was identified as a safe place for women at BCC to share their experiences. Since then, more than 400 posts have appeared from different genders and sexual orientations across our community, but primarily from young women. Some detail devastating experiences of assault, harassment, or highly inappropriate or disturbing conduct. I want to start with a trigger warning. This is going to be a frank discussion of difficult and even upsetting subjects. If it is not for you or it becomes too much, please feel free to leave or feel free to watch the taped program as you wish at a later date. We will also be posting victims' assistance numbers for anyone who wishes to reach out. This evening is meant to help and support, not to harm. When these posts began appearing, I spoke with a wide number of parents and students, and also with Dr. Mooney at BCC and Ms. Serino at Westland. I had multiple conversations with Devlin as the new student government leader. This event is one result of those conversations. We are all committed together to building and ensuring a far better environment at BCC as well as at our middle schools. This is our first step. Tonight, our distinguished panel is donating their time to answer your questions and address your concerns. If there is one takeaway that I can leave you with, it is that if you have been a victim or you are a survivor, the door is always open for help. In Montgomery County, you do not have to go through the criminal justice system to get aid, support, and compassion. Our presenters will share information about victim services, which are available to anyone, as well as about the reporting and investigation process, about what happens in the legal system, the victims' assistance areas, and the school system for issues ranging from sexual assault to online harassment. They will let you know what protections are in place and so much more. We are deeply thankful to them. They have devoted many hours and many meetings to this evening. Leading the discussion will be Debbie Feinstein, who for 8 years has been the chief of the Special Victims Division of the State's Attorney's Office. She also currently chairs both the Montgomery County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council and Choose Respect Montgomery, an initiative aimed at reducing teen dating violence and sexual assault. With her is Captain Amy Dahm of the Montgomery County Police Department. Captain Dahm is the director of the Special Victims Investigations Division. She oversees detectives who investigate sexual assault, physical and sexual abuse against children, internet crimes against children, missing children, and domestic violence. Devlin, would you please introduce our other panelists?
Yes, hi, I'm Devlin Orland, president of BCC's School-Wide SGA. Along with us tonight to talk about these important topics are Dr. Rafaya Prince, Montgomery County native who is a supervisor at Montgomery County's Trauma Services, which includes domestic violence and the Rape Crisis Center. She manages the outreach program that responds to support victims. Also helping with our discussion is Smita Varia, the program manager for the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. She manages initiatives for victims and offenders and conducts workshops across the county on domestic and dating violence. Additionally with us are Sergeant Andrew Suh, who is the supervisor for child abuse and sexual assault section for the Montgomery County Police, Mr. Greg Edmondson, the Director of Student Welfare and Compliance for Montgomery County Public Schools, and BCC's principal, Dr. Shelton Mooney. We thank them all for sharing their time and expertise with us tonight. I want to repeat the trigger warning that Ms. Winnick shared that this evening will contain sensitive and difficult content. Also, for the seniors and juniors who may already taken health, we will begin the evening with about 5 minutes reviewing consent, which is very valuable, but you may have already learned about it in class. Please stick with us, and we will get to all the content about reporting and victim services shortly. Finally, the chat function will be open. Please be respectful and do not include any names in the chat. We will try to answer some questions. However, most questions will be answered after the event to allow for a full explanation. If you have a question you would like to ask privately, please direct it to Ms. Lyric Winnick. Thank you for coming, and now I'd like to turn the program over to Ms. Feinstein to begin.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Lyric and to Devlin for hosting this evening. We're very grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you about these important topics. As was mentioned, I chair an initiative called Choose Respect Montgomery. Some of you may have heard of it. It is a teen dating violence and sexual assault prevention initiative aimed at the teenage population, parents of teens, as well as youth service providers and educators. And we have all sorts of events during the year. We run webinars in the COVID times, as well as typically we would run an annual event. We offer classes to students in their health classrooms, which some of you may have benefited from. And we also have a public service announcement contest. So I'm going to do a quick PSA right now, right off the top, and I'll probably remind everyone at the end. You have the opportunity to earn 10 SSL hours by creating a public service announcement about teen dating violence prevention, and all of the instructions are online. You can win $1,000 if you are the top place winner. And last year, if you voted on the fan favorite, about 19,000 Montgomery County Public School students had the opportunity to vote. This is in 2019, so pre-pandemic, and had the opportunity to vote and participate and really benefit and learn from that process. And I know that the folks here tonight are you're already educated on these topics, and we're looking to even dive deeper tonight. And we would welcome particularly, those teens, the 9th through 12th graders that are on tonight, or actually 8th through 12th graders that are on tonight to participate in this contest and share your knowledge with your fellow students and other folks your age. So there was my PSA, and thank you for the time to do that. We're going to dive right into the content tonight. The format is going to be, we have a series of questions and things that we're going to answer that were provided in advance that Lyric had solicited, and we're very happy to answer those. We're also going to be monitoring the chat, although we may not have a chance to answer all of the questions in the chat, and it may be that we're covering some of those things later in the program. We've got a list of your questions and plan to address them, and we'll do the best that we can. Now, if we don't get to your question, or if you ask a private question, our plan is to look at all of the questions at the end and make sure that we're responding even after this event is over. We are here for you, and we definitely want to be responsive to the questions that you have and the things that you want to know more about. So without further sort of wind up here, we're going to dive right into the content. The first question is, what defines sexual assault? And I'm going to ask Captain Dom if she could please share what defines sexual assault.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks, everyone. I am so happy to be here today. Lyric, Devlin, fabulous job putting this event together. As y'all can tell from the background noise, I have some kids upstairs, a dog upstairs, so I apologize in advance. So Debbie, to go back to your question, what defines sexual assault? I really want to kind of keep it simple today. So it's any unwanted touching, it's any sexual act for the purposes of abuse or gratification or the abuse of either party. Now, that can include sexual intercourse. It can also include sexual acts. It may be inappropriate touching. So it's really sexual contact against the will and without the consent of one or both parties that is considered a sexual assault.
And I think sexual assault, Captain Dom, correct me if I'm wrong, sexual assault really is, it's gotten sort of a broader terminology in sort of our public discourse right now. When we think about sexual assault, it's really an unwanted sexual touching. And that's basically what it is, and it without consent. And what consent is an important topic. And that's what Devlin was talking about earlier, that we were going to spend some time kind of going over what consent is. And there were a number of questions posed prior to tonight about, well, what constitutes consent? What if you were pressured into something? What does this mean? And I'm going to say right from the front, as we speak this evening, because something is a sexual assault doesn't necessarily mean that it's a criminal sexual assault. And we're going to talk a little bit about those distinctions later too. But the bottom line is, and what we're going to tell you over and over tonight, if you believe that you were sexually assaulted, if you feel like you were sexually assaulted, the legal definitions don't matter. Whether it's a criminal case, whether you want to pursue a criminal case or not, or whether you just want to talk to someone and get support, that's all that matters. And we are here to speak to you. And Dr. Prince is on the line, and this is what she does. She works with survivors of sexual assault. It doesn't matter how sexual assault is defined. It matters what it means to you in terms of getting that support and that help. And again, we're going to reiterate that over and over again tonight, because I think that from my perspective, that is the most important takeaway that we can talk about this evening. So Smitha's going to talk about consent now, and we're going to spend, as Devlin indicated, about 5 minutes just kind of doing a little education piece up at the front. And we apologize to those of you that may have seen this before. Please, Smitha.
Thank you, Debbie. So I'm going to talk, as Debbie said, a little bit about consent and what consent is. And is everyone able to view my slides? Great. So I want us to talk about consent, and first just want to go over the definition again, right? So it's if someone is giving their permission for all sexual content that happens. And again, I want to preface that by all sexual content, a lot of times we think consent equals when somebody is having what we typically think of as sex, but it includes any touching, any hugging, any kissing, any sexual contact. If somebody wants to pat somebody on the butt, if somebody wants to touch somebody in a place that, you know, they don't usually want to be touched, all of those things need to have consent attached to them. It's freely given. It's of a person's own free will, which also means without manipulation, without pressure. And consent is agreeing and saying yes throughout the entire act. So I want to go over really quickly, what does that sound like? So a lot of times we think, okay, consent sounds like yes, and consent does not, and no consent sounds like no. But there are multiple ways to say that, right? Consent can sound like, this is okay, absolutely. I like that, of course, sure, yes. It can be an enthusiastic, woohoo, let's go. It can be anything enthusiastic in a positive way. What consent does not sound like? Of course, no, but it could be, I'm not ready, not tonight, I'm not sure, stop. And then I always get questions about this because I have here listed, I guess so, or maybe. So a lot of times we think, I guess so sounds like yes, but let me put it to you this way. Let's say a friend comes up to you with a pair of new shoes and says, well, do you like my new shoes? And the other person responds with, I guess so. That doesn't really sound like a yes to me. So we want to make sure we get that affirmative, enthusiastic yes consent. I also want to add that sometimes somebody might not say anything at all. They may, but they may be saying no through body language. They may be pushing the person away. They may not respond. They may be moving around and trying to leave the room. They may be crying. These are all signs that they do not want to consent. That's why you always want to get some sort of verbal, affirmative acknowledgement to do whatever the sexual act that you want to do is. So now we're going to watch a really short video that many of you may have seen, but I think it's a great illustration of explaining consent as it pertains to actually just drinking a cup of tea. Oh, and I'm sorry, really quickly, I wanted to say, silence, if somebody does not say something, that does not equal yes. Again, we want that to be a verbal, affirmative, enthusiastic, positive. So here is the video.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup.
I'm so sorry. I must have loaded the wrong video. My apologies. I really, really do apologize. I didn't realize that this came in different versions. So we will go ahead and skip this video, but I will go ahead and review what the slide went through. Again, my apologies. I really do apologize to everybody. So consent we like to think of as fries, right? So it's freely given. It's consenting is a choice you make, again, without pressure, without manipulation, and or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. It's reversible. What does that mean? Anyone can change their mind. And they can change their mind of doing the act at any time. And even includes if they've done that act before. Let's say you're in a relationship and you do something on a Saturday. That does not mean that you don't have to consent to each time you do it. You absolutely do. It also means that consent is informed. You can only consent to something if you have the full story. For example, if somebody says that they will use a birth control or a condom and then they don't, that's not full consent. We always, again, I can't stress this enough, want it to be enthusiastic. When it comes to sexual contact, you should only do stuff that you want to do and not things that you feel that you're expected to do or that you owe to somebody. And again, the consent also needs to be specific. You can say yes to one thing. I can say yes to, yes, I want to kiss you. That doesn't mean that you're consenting to something further than that. You have to get consent throughout the entire act. Again, I truly apologize for the video. There is a video more suitable for this audience. I will put the link in the chat so that you all can view that at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Smitha. You know, the gravamen of the tea video is if you can agree to have a cup of tea. You can have the person that you asked to make the cup of tea can go into the kitchen, can brew the tea, or can heat up the hot water, brew the tea, put the tea into a teacup, and bring you the tea. And if you just change your mind and you decide you don't want the tea, what the video says over and over again is you don't get to pour the tea down the person's throat just because they said 20 minutes ago that they wanted a cup of tea. If they don't want it 20 minutes later, you don't get to pour the tea down their throat. And that is basically the repetitive message throughout that. If you said on Saturday you wanted tea and you drank some tea, if the next Saturday you're together again and your partner wants tea and you don't want tea, they don't get to pour the tea down your throat. So that's basically what the video is about. It's a great illustration, very, very straightforward, and I would encourage you all to watch it. The other takeaway that I would suggest to all of you is we hear a lot, again, kind of in pop culture about no means no. We're turning that up on its head. We're saying to you, yes means yes, that enthusiastic, affirmative yes. And I think that that's a really important takeaway because no can be ambiguous. Yes is not ambiguous. It has to be a yes or one of those other phrases or terminologies that Smitha was describing to you a few minutes ago. So thank you for indulging us in the time to spend a little bit of time on consent, because I think that really lays some of the groundwork for what we're going to continue to talk about, and you can understand that. But let me remind you, even if you said something ambiguous like maybe or something like that, and you feel violated, get help if you want help. Talk to someone. There's anonymous ways to have conversations with individuals, and we're constantly posting those in the chat. It's what you feel that is the most important, and the opportunity and the fact that there are resources in this community for you to talk to someone without judgment and confidentially. So thank you so much again, Smitha. I'm going to now turn to another question, and I'm going to direct this to both to Captain Dom and to Dr. Prince, and if there are others on the panel. So what does someone do if they experience a sexual assault? What are their options? What is the process? And what are services that are available? If you don't necessarily want to report, but you want to get help. So let's start with, what do you do if you've experienced sexual assault? What are your options? I'm going to start with Captain Dom.
Thanks, Debbie. So one of the options, of course, is to come forward and make a police report. You have a couple of ways that you can do that. You can always call the non-emergency number, which is 301-279-8000. That's the number that you can call anytime you want to make a report when you're not involved in an exigent emergency situation. So you can also report through your school. Your school still knows how to contact your school resource officer, which is another great person to go ahead and take that report. You can report to a trusted adult. Many adults are mandated reporters, and we're going to talk specifically about what that means a little bit later today. If you do choose to make a police report, an officer or an SRO will need to document the basics of the event as you recall it, get your information, get your parents' information, and in many circumstances, if your parents aren't with you, they will be contacted after you make a police report. After an initial report is made, in many cases, you'll be contacted by one of my detectives, an investigator with the Special Victims Investigations Division, and they will arrange to have a formal interview to get specific details about what happened. If the event is a 4th-degree sex offense, and what does that mean? It really applies to inappropriate sexual touching. Those are often followed up by a patrol officer or your school resource officer. They'll still be sitting down with you to try to get the specific details of what exactly happened. And we'll talk a little bit more about specific details about what happens after your report comes to special victims a little bit later as well. Dr. Prince, would you like to add?
Yes, you can also report to victim services. That's another way, and get help. We have therapists, we have victim advocates there to help you to make a decision on what you want to do. It's up to you at that point if you're ready, and if you're ever ready to report to the police or not, because there's no statute of limitation of getting help or even reporting to the police.
And I do want to add that, like consent, in many cases, a police investigation is dictated by what the victim wants and the needs of the victim at the time of the investigation. We've had many investigations come through our division where the victim says, you know what, I'm not ready yet, and may take months of therapy or counseling or conversations before they are ready to come forward and make that full criminal report.
And I was just going to add, I'm sorry, Dr. Prince, did you want to add something?
Yeah, there was something that came through the chat. If you're over the age of 16, you can you don't need your parents' permission to have the therapy. If you're under 16, you're allowed one session without your parents' consent to get help.
I was just going to add, so Captain Dom used the term 4th-degree sexual offense. So there are different degrees of sexual offense in Maryland, and a 4th-degree sexual offense is simply, it's really what it sounds, it's the basic unconsented to sexual touching. Now, Captain Dom was talking before about sort of different levels of sexual offenses. So there's a 3rd-degree sexual offense, which is a forceful touching, really out either just sort of on the external part of your body in an intimate area, the genital area, the breast, that sort of thing. And then a 2nd-degree sexual offense, a 2nd-degree rape, which now includes, it includes anal intercourse, vaginal intercourse, digital penetration, fellatio, cunnilingus, all of those things now in Maryland constitute 2nd-degree rape. And then a 1st-degree rape is a situation where it's one of those rapes, one of the things that I just described, but also includes the use of a weapon, a threat to kill, strangulation, suffocation. So there are different degrees of sexual assault within the law in Maryland, but you don't need to worry about any of that. I'm telling you that because it may come up as we're talking, but you don't need to worry about those pieces. That's what we're here for. And when you're making a report, you talk about what happened, you describe it. And again, as was said, if you don't want to come to the police at that moment in time, you don't have to. That's going to be up to you. Is there anything either that Mr. Edmondson or Dr. Mooney want to reflect from the MCPS side about if someone comes forward at the school level?
So in terms of the school level, I think the pieces to add there is that our first concern is really to make sure that any student who comes to us is safe to begin with. Like that's really our first question, like to make sure that there is not an immediate safety concern, but then we work through the same process essentially if it's something that we need to involve the school resource officer in right away based on our memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County Police Department in terms of that. And that's a decision that we have a huddle about and talk. We also collaborate with, the beauty of kind of the system that MCPS and the cooperation that we have with Montgomery County is that we have the opportunity to have those conversations all together and get the pieces all together and try to make the best decision moving forward. So one of the first pieces once we at the school level address the safety concern is really a call to Mr. Edmondson's office to talk about what we know to talk about. And that call involves, Mr. Edmondson, you can help me here, safety and security, mental health experts from MCPS, people from the state's attorney's office a lot of times, different opportunities for us to look at it to try to make sure we're making the best decision to support the student and address things promptly and properly.
And I think, Dr. Mooney, you raised a really important point that I don't want to sort of lose sight of. Now, and I want to just be clear on this, there may be times that you come forward and report something and it is someone that has raped multiple people and is a public safety threat and a danger. I want to just say to you, because I'm going to be completely transparent, in that situation, you may not want to go forward, but we may proceed with our investigation and try to get that person removed from our community so that everyone can be safe. So I want to be transparent about that, because I think the public safety issue is definitely a really big one that we have to consider. We take a victim-centered approach. We use trauma-informed interviewing when we're speaking to victims of sexual assault. That's a very specific interviewing technique designed not to inflame the situation any further and to be supportive and to use appropriate language when you're talking to a survivor of sexual assault. But if there is some larger public safety issue, there may be times that the investigation continues even if the initial victim of the sexual assault isn't interested in participating. So I just want to be pretty transparent about that. Mr. Edmondson, was there something that you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. Yes, and just to support Dr. Mooney's points that we try to be as what was the term you used earlier? PSAs, public service. We try to get the information out to our students as much as possible, as was mentioned earlier, about the ways to report, whether they want to go to the police, whether they go to the Victims Assistance Program, the Maryland Safe Schools tip line, all of these different ways that a person can report. I think it's important to know that it does get back to the school. Like, we work very closely and we collaborate with SVID, we collaborate with the victim assistance programs, and we work through our chief safety officer, and we work through our office of family engagement, and making sure that the person reporting has the supports that they need emotionally, that the person has the supports that they need physically if there is something that could be an imminent danger. But each of those types of reports are brought back into MCPS because we work very closely together. And so there's multiple different ways to report. And if you report just to your principal or to your counselor, we also go the other way and we reach out immediately to SVID. We reach out immediately to Child Protective Services if it involves an adult who's supervising or a caretaker. We have a great collaborative effort with the multi inner as well as external agencies. And I think it's important to understand that that each of those different avenues are going to get back together so we can support the reporter and the victim as much as possible right away.
Debbie, I wanted to also add, like what everyone is saying, is that there really is no wrong door to getting help. And I also wanted to mention some of the collaborative efforts that we have going on as well, because I hear a lot of talk about how we work together. We have something called the Montgomery County SART, and that's a sexual response team. And our mission is to ensure that that when a victim, anyone that touches a victim after a sexual assault or rape, is treated in a trauma-informed way. So we develop protocols and procedures to ensure that that happens. And at the table are the police, the state's attorney's office, we have the school board, all collaborating to ensure that we're working in the best way to be trauma-informed for victims.
And Mr. Evanson, there was a question in the chat, and I recall this coming up before. One of the individuals asked, it was something about basically is Montgomery County Public Schools, or are we going to believe a victim when they come forward? The answer from all of our perspective is a straightforward yes. Yeah, it's a yes.
Absolutely, and I want to be really clear about that. Is we take every single report extremely seriously, and we believe the victim when whatever they're telling us. And I want to make it, and if it wasn't made clear in a past town hall, which I feel like it wasn't, if the reporter's not feeling, if the victim's not feeling like they're being taken seriously, go to the next level, go to the next way of reporting. Call our office. I mean, we work with the principals, but we also work with other directors. We work with you. I work in alignment with Captain Dom and you, Debbie, to ensure that every stone's unturned, so to speak. And if the reporter's not feeling like they're being believed by whoever the individual is they're speaking to, go and continue to report to another. Call us, send an email, send a text message to every mind. It gets back to us. We have all these different ways of reporting, and we don't want you to sit and be uncomfortable with any type of report if you're not feeling like it's being taken seriously. We have these protocols, we have a process to follow, and we take it on our end extremely seriously.
If there are any barriers to reporting or being taken seriously, I mean, you can also just go directly to Dr. Prince's program, to the Victim of Sexual Assault program, and if it's dating violence, you can also go directly to the Family Justice Center, where there's therapists available and support and victim advocates. So we've got lots of resources in this county. They are free, they are confidential. If you bring something to one of those resources and develop a therapeutic relationship, that information is confidential and it doesn't go anywhere without your consent. So I want to be clear about that. That's a distinction between, talking to a therapist or someone in Dr. Prince's program is different than coming to my office, the state's attorney's office, or to the police. And really the way that the most sort of straightforward way to report, if you want services and support, is to go to VASAP. So I just want to be really clear about that, as we go forward. One of the next, yes, please.
I would quickly like to add, Special Victims has a motto, and it's start by believing. And I think that that's shared by all of our partners. And when Mr. Edmondson talks about working collaboratively, we meet several times a week through the partner agencies to discuss cases that have come up. Even in a 24-hour period, we may meet and discuss cases on several times during that 24-hour period. So please know that when you come forward to Special Victims or you come forward to one of our partner agencies, we do start by believing.
And I just want to quickly, just scrolling up the chat, there was a question about rape kit backlog. There's actually legislation in Maryland now that there's a timeline. There's for recent cases, for a case, if when new kits are coming in, there's not a backlog. Correct me if I'm wrong, Captain Dom, on that. There's not a backlog on the testing. I mean, it can take some time for our lab to test, but it's not this years-long backlog that you hear about in the news. There are specific timeframes, specific mandates that have to be met under the law. So I want to be clear on that, because I definitely wouldn't want someone to be discouraged from reporting because they feel like their kit isn't going to be tested. That is not the case, at least as far as my understanding. Captain Dom, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. So I have a dedicated team of personnel that are literally researching every single rape kit that we have in our custody with Montgomery County Police. We're currently somewhere, I think in 2012, looking at historical cases. Many of the cases that we found that were not tested by the victim's preference. We also have, so what we've done basically is gone back through every rape kit that we have and looked at our current legislative influences on which kits get tested. We are going back and contacting victims and confirming that their decision stands, that they do not want to have those kits tested. We are working with victim assistance to coordinate that effort. So no, if you are a victim in Montgomery County today, and you choose to have your kit tested, it will be tested.
In a very timely fashion, meeting the mandates that are required by law.
Debbie, to add to, the SART currently is working on a document that's going to outline, give a somewhat timeline of what to expect after a sexual assault or rape. And that also includes the rape kit procedures from the forensic lab, the hospital, state's attorney's office, police, and we're hoping to roll that out pretty soon, and we'll do a big press release so folks get it.
Yeah, and I think, it's Dr. Prince is also reflecting on something that different reports take different paths. sort of depending on where your report starts, whether you want it to become a criminal case, whether you don't, whether you could decide 2 years from now that you want it to be criminally pursued, and it will be pursued at that time. So, you know, I think there isn't sort of a, you know, we talk about the reporting process. There are many doors, as Dr. Prince was saying earlier, to making those reports. And then the path that it may take, it's going to always be a forward path, but it's also going to be in large part dictated by the survivor of the sexual assault. So I want to be clear on that as well. And that sort of leads into the next question: what is and is not a reportable offense, and who decides? I think was Sergeant Suh going to address that, or Captain Dom?
I'll start and then I'll hand it over to the Sarge. But really, if you feel that something inappropriate has occurred, make a report. And we will work together to figure out if that inappropriate action was criminal, if it was something else, if it needs to be addressed by the school. We can help to determine all those things, as can Dr. Prince and her team. Sarge, would you like to add anything?
Sorry, Elsa, reviewing a search warrant. No, I mean, everything you said, Captain.
So, you know, I would add to that. So there's what is a reportable offense, and then sort of looping back to one of the questions that was asked earlier, you know, about, you know, the confidentiality and who you report to. And, you know, as Dr. Prince pointed out, you know, if you're 16 and older, it's, you know, it doesn't have to get reported to your parents. So there is a distinction between peer-on-peer sexual assault. So if you are both teens, and a sexual assault that is perpetrated by an adult on a child, or that's called sexual abuse. Actually, it's a different legal term. When an adult perpetrates sex abuse on a child, it can also be called rape and sexual offense and all those things, but the general terminology from a legal perspective is different. And the process, frankly, is very different. Because if you report as someone under the age of 18, and you report that you were sexually abused by an adult, that will be a mandatory report to child welfare. That will be a mandatory report to the police. So I want to be clear on that as well, because we don't want anyone to sort of wonder or think that something's going to be held back in some of these situations. That is required by law. If a child is sexually abused by an adult, it is a mandatory report. And I will tell you that there are, you know, you hear this term mandatory reporters. We are all under law in Maryland mandatory reporters. Every single person that lives in the state of Maryland that is an adult is a mandatory reporter. Now, there's no, let me be clear also and transparent, there's actually no criminal penalty for failing to report for the general person. Now, there are criminal penalties if someone who's an educator fails to make a report. There are penalties for someone that is a medical professional, a police officer, a therapist. There are penalties for those individuals as well. So there's some teeth behind this, but again, very clear. There's a different reporting structure if it's an adult that is perpetrating the abuse on a child than if it's peer-to-peer, teen-to-teen sexual assault. So I just want to be clear on that as well. Is there, and that would include teachers, coaches, et cetera. Captain Dom or Sergeant Suh, is there something that you want to add? Yeah, please.
I mean, and it's not on the clock mandatory reporting. It's if I were having a conversation with a neighbor and that neighbor said something that made me suspect there was an abusive situation, I'm mandated to report on a Saturday afternoon. And so I know that I've had colleagues who have had conversations with people at the airport, and they've had to say, I need to make a report to this because I am an educator and I'm a mandated reporter. So it's not just during the school day and when we're on the clock either. And I think that's a really important detail.
Yeah, that's a really important detail. Captain Dom, Sergeant Suh?
I'd like to add that could include healthcare practitioners. It could include your coach. So it's really anyone that comes into regular contact with youth in a professional capacity is very likely a mandatory reporter.
Okay. So the next question that was posed to us. So, and this sort of links back again to this, the earlier question of is someone who is a survivor of sexual assault or someone that comes forward and reports, are they going to be believed? But we also have to think about the fact that sometimes there are false reports. Now, there's not a discrepancy between those two things. Yes, you will be believed. And yes, there will be an investigation. And sometimes, unfortunately, because we've seen unfortunate like national news that has come out where someone has, made a false report, sometimes that happens, but that is not the presumption. And that is far, far, far from the norm. So I want to ask, either one of my police partners, and I'm happy to speak to this as well, to sort of talk about what does that investigation process entail? How do we analyze and look at these cases to make decisions about what goes forward in the criminal justice system?
So I'll start if that's okay. So I want to say that the detectives are fact finders, that they're looking for facts, and we start by believing. And what happens is, just like today, so I apologize, I had to review a search warrant. Today, we got a report from patrol. So I had to dispatch a detective out to go investigate, to find facts. But most of our cases actually come through CPS and MCPS. Those are our primary reporting. Yep. Sorry, yes, Child Protective Services and MCPS. Those are our two primary sources where we get all our reports and our intakes. So what happens is I get the report, I review the intake, and if appropriate, I assign it out to a detective like I did today. And if there's a care and custody component, we actually work with CPS together jointly with the investigation. And the state's attorney office is pretty much always providing guidance and also assisting in the investigation as well for most of these cases. Now, the exact order of how we investigate really depends on each case, but typically we'll start with safety plan, which MCPS kind of talked about. So usually CPS, MCPS, the police office, the police department will make sure the victim is safe. That is our priority. Even if we maybe lose a small piece of evidence, it's most important that we keep the victim safe. So next, we usually try to interview. We try to get facts from the complainant, from the victim, from the witnesses. Then we try to preserve and collect evidence. And then we'll interview the suspect. And when we interview the suspect, the detectives will then try to prove or disprove the suspect's statements. And throughout the entire process, we're constantly working with CPS, state's attorneys, doctors and nurses, the school, and we'll have what's called MDTs. We usually have it weekly, where all the people I just mentioned would come together collaboratively and try to work together, putting the victim first, and then trying to solve the cases together and providing services. And then after all that, the detective reviews everything and then consults with the state's attorney and then files for charges if appropriate. And I know people are concerned about false reports. And as Debbie said, they do happen, but they're rare. But in those cases, we also understand that the victim will still need services. That maybe it's just an unfounded case, but the victim still needs services. So then we work with our partners to provide those services. And lastly, our detectives are highly trained. And throughout the investigative process that I just described, there are a number of signs that would indicate that the report may be less than truthful. So if that's the case, then we'll handle it that way. So, and then it's up to Debbie's team.
So I think, I think that there was a question in the chat. I want to just clarify. What if a teenager sexually assaults another teenager? For example, a 16-year-old assaults another 16-year-old. Does mandatory reporting still apply? No, it doesn't. Mandatory reporting relates, as I said a moment ago, an adult perpetrator and a child victim. Child meaning anyone under the age of 18. So teens are included in that definition. So just to be very clear on that. And Sergeant Suh's division investigates child abuse, where we're talking about, the adult perpetrator and the child victim. And there's another division within the department that does adult sexual assaults, and then teen on teen sexual assaults. I believe actually, Sergeant Suh, I think you all look at those as well. I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. I'm realizing that you all do those as well. So they would look at a 16-year-old on a 16-year-old, but it wouldn't necessitate a mandatory report in the same way. So they would only be looking at it if it comes to them because you brought it to them. Let me be clear in that way. Or you made a decision with your therapist, with your support person, with your, with whoever you're working with, et cetera, or with your family, that you want to come forward to the police, and then it's investigated in that way. I hope that answers that question. I wanted to just also, and this is a question, I guess, for Dr. Mooney or Mr. Edmondson, for situations where a case does not rise to the level of a criminal offense, what role will MCPS play? So say that the case comes to the police department or to my office, to the state's attorney's office, and we've made a determination that it doesn't rise to the level of a case that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt under the elements of the criminal offense. Kind of like what I was talking about earlier. The criminal standard and the sort of realistic standard may be different, if that makes sense, the common sense standard. So say that there's a situation, someone was inappropriately touched, but either there's not enough evidence or corroboration or something to go forward, but we still want to put safety in place and other things. What does the school do in those situations? If there's an assault or harassing situation and the students are in the same school, what happens then?
So we start actually with just looking at it from the point of view of the MCPS code of conduct and what our policies and regulations are, and we address it in terms of that. But that's a small piece of it in turn, and that's dealing with really the person who's accused of doing something more. If we think about the person who is making the claim, really our goal is to think about that safety point of view again. So we would do a look at options like a safety plan, really having a conversation, a very direct and clear conversation with a student about what their options are, about what they do if they start to feel, if there anything that triggers. Identifying trusted adults that they feel that they can go to, helping them identify the supports within the building and knowing who they can talk to and really what they can go with there. That's our biggest thing. Make sure that they know what supports are available. If there are changes we need to make, changes in schedules or any of those things, we have as a cooperative dialogue. I give you an example. A few weeks ago, we had a situation where we were talking with two students, and we engaged with one of the students about whether or not they would like to have a change of schedule to remove them from a situation. In the end, they decided not to because in a Zoom class, it was easy enough to kind of avoid the interactions. But in a school setting, it's not uncommon to have class or schedule changes even, or even changes to passing patterns where students are, out a few minutes earlier or not, or stay a little bit behind in class to do that. So we look at that safety plan and really think about how we can help provide supports to the student who's making a report.
If I can add, mentioned earlier when the police are involved, and even if we haven't gotten to that point yet where you're saying, okay, there's not enough information for this to warrant criminal process, and then they hand it back to the school. Even before that decision, we've implemented a safety plan. So that's part of our process right up front. And I'll give you, an authentic example is we have two students. One reported to the police that there was an incident. And as the police were investigating, we were speaking with the police on a regular basis to find out if there's something bigger, like a predatory situation where we really have to take the reported offender and have some other accommodations or some other decisions made. But in this case, both students were on the same school team. And so there was an upcoming event or a meet, and both students had a right to be in attendance to that meet as it's being investigated. And so MCPS actually hired someone to supervise that event just to make sure that those two students were not in any type of engagement or any type of contact with each other for the whole event. And so that could be to the extent of a safety plan that we want to make sure is in place. But again, if something's bigger, like you mentioned earlier, Debbie, that we may have to take additional means with the offender if we have information or we have enough detail that would preclude that. But yes, once the police or once your office says we don't have enough here to move on, it does become a school investigation. And we do have the student code of conduct. We have certain levels of inappropriate behavior that we will use, and all the students are aware of this document. And we'll use that to help us determine any type of consequences. And just because the behavior is not criminal doesn't mean it's not inappropriate. We're actually working with the Board of Ed right now to revisit our sexual harassment policy to now call it sexual misconduct and sexual harassment, where you don't have to have a Title IX type harassment situation and still be inappropriate misconduct of a sexual nature. And so we have the disciplinary actions that we can take through the code of conduct, even in that event. And so I think it's really important that, people understand that we will use our investigative processes. We have security supervisors in every school. We also have our chief security officer who has a team that can help us with that. And we're here to support the principal and their administrative team who are trained in these types of investigations as well. You're
Sorry, I
muted.
apologize. I muted myself. There was a question in the chat, which I think actually sort of again circles back to some of the things we were talking about earlier. If there are MCPS, if MCPS has information that maybe doesn't rise to the level of charges, but there's a pattern, like multiple complaints against the same student. And you get, like, for example, they're saying here 10 reports that aren't individually chargeable, but all about the same person. I can answer from the state's attorney perspective, and I would welcome anything from Mr. Edmondson's perspective. So we, as was described multiple times, we meet regularly. And if there is one person that there are multiple complaints about, we have a conversation. And then we start to look deeper, because there's actually, now, again, this is going to depend on whether the survivor wants to go forward and all of those other layers of things. But there's actually a relatively new law in the state of Maryland that allows us to use evidence of other sexual misconduct in certain criminal cases. And that has given us a broader ability when there's a repeat offender to look at cases and potentially have enough to prosecute them. So those patterns are incredibly important. And we talk about them on a regular basis. If we see a particular offender where each individual situation may not rise to the level of criminal activity, but when you look at it as a whole, there may need to be some intervention, whether it's criminal or otherwise. Those things are being looked at and discussed on a regular basis. And that's whether it's a student and that's whether it's an employee. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the conversation about teachers and adults and grooming and what that behavior is, and why it's important to be aware of those situations as well in terms of when we're talking about sexual misconduct.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead, please.
I mean, the more, no incident or report is ever truly closed. I mean, as you get more information or as things start to add to a scenario or add to a particular student, we're in contact with you, we're in contact with the police. And yes, I mean, it could re-rise back up to a criminal situation with multiple reports. But I do think that, as Dr. Mooney had mentioned, that sometimes we'll offer the reporter or the victim a change of schedule. Sometimes we'll make an administrative decision about changing the schedule, and at times we have changed the school assignment for an offender, and the person who is still not at a criminal level from the police side, but we have made an administrative decision that it's not appropriate for them to be at this particular school. We might find an alternative educational structure for them, even if it's not a criminal situation. And so we've had those scenarios as well, and kind of works both ways. That's why our collaborative approach with the external agencies is just really, it's vital in all of this.
And Mr. Edmondson, just to clarify, when you're talking about an alternative educational approach, you're not talking about like moving a kid from BCC to WJ. You're talking about potentially moving a kid from BCC into a different educational structure outside of a high school if they can't be safely a part of a teen community in a high school. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm talking about both.
Yeah.
So there might be there have been situations where the general ed high school, typical high school structure is not appropriate for this person. There are times when, for the safety of the offender as well as others, that it's most appropriate that they have a new start in a different traditional high school or middle school. It just, each of these are taken, again, incident by incident.
Okay, great. And I just want to reflect on some of the comments in the chat from at Survivors at BCC about the very small numbers of false reports. That's, first of all, that's statistically correct. And it's also completely consistent with what I see in the work that I do in prosecuting sexual assaults. That it's a very, very tiny number. where, someone has some external motivation. When we're talking about, the survivor's account, when we're talking about sort of reporting of sexual assault in general, these are truthful reports, and no one would ever suggest otherwise. I also want to kind of pivot to looking at the privacy concerns for victims and the confidentiality, which is a question that I was going to ask Dr. Prince if she could address, and Smitha if she could address with respect to the Family Justice Center. But Dr. Prince, if you could start sort of about what that confidentiality looks like, and how survivors of sexual assault are protected and can remain anonymous.
So when a survivor comes for victim services, the Rape Crisis Center, they have an extra layer of protection. Like if you go to see a therapist, typically you're protected by HIPAA. Victims of sex assault and rape are also protected by the Violence Against Women's Act, which is called VAWA. And that's the strongest protection that's out there right now for health information. So if a victim does want to communicate with any external agencies or with the police or the state's attorney's office or family members, they have to sign the appropriate paperwork in order for that to happen. You have to release your information. There is the exception, like Debbie was saying, if anything is divulged about any type of sexual abuse of a child or harming of an elderly person or someone who has limited or who's disabled, then we are mandatory reporters as well. But when it comes to sex assault, you have the highest level of confidentiality when you come to speak at your Rape Crisis Center for help.
So, Debbie, and I'd like to kind of bridge a little bit of what's going on in the chat when we're talking about the survivor accounts and the differences between the services that Dr. Prince and her team can provide versus the investigations and the criminal links between the things that are being said on those survivor accounts. Someone had asked about how the survivor accounts, what happens next when you're posting at survivors at BCC. Many of the posts on the survivor accounts are anonymous. And unfortunately, when you talk about a police report, there's not much that we can do from anonymous sources. And because there are so many accounts and so many things happening, it's very difficult for us to identify a victim. And best practices in many cases say that we shouldn't be contacting a victim until that victim is ready to come to us. Dr. Prince, do you want to add a little bit about talking about victims and when they're ready to come forward and how important it is to respect that readiness?
A lot of times for victims, it may feel like they have lost their voice or they've lost everything after an assault. And it's important that we empower victims to find that voice again. And that's the whole reason why we leave it up to the victim to make that decision. And we support them in that effort. So for example, maybe you never want to report to the police, or you decide 3 weeks later that you do. We'll have a victim advocate help you or arrange that report with the police or the meeting with the state's attorney's office. But we just always are guided by the victim's decisions.
And it may also be an opportune time to talk about the impact that sharing someone else's story on an account like that could have on our survivors who aren't ready to tell what happened. So that's another important thing to keep in mind when we talk about sharing the stories of others on their behalf.
And if I could just ask Dr. Mooney or Mr. Edmondson, with respect to the privacy piece, if a student comes to MCPS, I know, Mr. Edmondson, you were speaking before sort of about the different layers of things and the different connections that are attempted to make. Is that also, though, victim driven? If someone comes forward and doesn't want to sort of take that next step, is there any requirement within MCPS to force that issue in some way?
So each is a conversation. We want to make sure that we're respecting their wishes. There possibly could be a situation where we don't feel that they are safe or feel that they're safe, and we will encourage them to talk to parents. We may have to, as we've said earlier, file a report or contact our SRO for more guidance. It's really scenario based. We want to make sure we honor their privacy, but our counselors are involved, because if we feel that we have a student who's distraught, or they're even contemplating, hurting themselves, we have some, mandatory obligations to follow, suicide risk protocols. And again, I'm going into different scenarios, but we really try to work closely with the student whenever whenever we have any of these conversations, to honor that confidentiality when and where we can.
Thank you. Dr. Mooney, is there anything you want to add?
I just will reiterate what Mr. Edmondson said, that really we're looking at caring for the student and making sure that they're in a good place in terms of that. But we do also try to take into account the whole picture, and if we need to help counsel them, or we need to provide supports that are beyond kind of what we can provide at a school level. We do view partners as parents as partners, but we rarely would we reach out to a parent about a situation without the student being fully aware that we're talking about something. Again, that would be, it is very much a case-by-case basis in what we see, because there's not one approach that would fit every situation.
It goes back to the age thing as well. If we're talking about I have a different perspective than Dr. Mooney, where if we're talking about a middle school student and they've been assaulted, and like we said, there's some things that we will get involved in a little bit more aggressively.
With the aim of providing services and support to the student, that's at least my understanding. And, with that overriding, obviously, concern about public safety that we've mentioned several times, and, community safety and school safety, those are always things that are paramount and things that we're thinking about. But really, I think the approach that everyone on the screen, takes is a victim-centered approach, which is have the victim, really survivor of the sexual assault. I'm sorry, I'm a prosecutor in the criminal justice system. So in the criminal justice system, as you're prosecuting a case, typically someone is referred to as a victim. I don't mean that as a negative or a diminishment of someone's experience. I end up using those terms interchangeably, but the survivor of sexual assault, someone who has been victimized, is a survivor by nature. I guess I want to just clarify that, and I firmly believe that. But that perspective is definitely taken into consideration. And as Dr. Prince was describing, if your first point of entry, if the door that you choose to go through is VASAP, it is 100% confidentiality for someone that is 16 and older. So if you're 16, 17, or 18 on this call, it is 100% confidentiality. That information is going nowhere. So when you're thinking about the doors and trying to figure out where things go, different doors may lead different places. So now, with the exception again with Dr. Prince, if you're 16 and you were sexually abused by a 45-year-old teacher, that's a different story. That is an adult-child situation like we described before. So I just want to be clear on that as well. I want to pivot for a second to something that Captain Dom had referred to, but I think we need to explore a little bit more deeply, which is sort of this issue of people outing other people, posting someone else's story, and then what pressure an individual who may choose to post may face if they post and share their truth, and then can get pressure or be minimized as a result afterwards, which I will tell you, unfortunately, I have seen in cases that we have prosecuted where the victim or the survivor of the sexual assault is actually placed in a very difficult situation by the community, suggested that they're not to be believed, that sort of thing. It's been a few years, and in more recent days, when there's been much more public information and knowledge about sexual assault, I've seen less of that, but it still exists. And I think it's important to talk about the resources around that, and as well as sort of that pressure aspect. And I'm going to ask Dr. Prince if she could start maybe by addressing some of that.
So that's why it's important to always have a good support system and have a therapist that you're working with during this whole process, especially if you're going the legal aspect and there's going to be a big criminal case and there's media involved. You want to be able to have someone to talk to about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. Because there are techniques and methods that we use to help build the strength for some of the things that you may encounter when dealing with like the court of public opinion. Mm-hmm. So, it's a good idea to be linked to the victim service program or a counselor, or if you have your private therapist that you're seeing, that you are speaking to someone and that you have a strong support system around you when you're going through all this.
Absolutely. And then, just to sort of address and ask from your perspective, Dr. Prince, what Captain Dom was describing before, where someone may, share someone else's story. Mm-hmm. Why is that incredibly difficult? What kind of a situation might that create, and how? And the way that I think about it is that's so disempowering to the person that is the survivor of sexual assault. If someone else shares their story and maybe sort of a cautionary tale, like, why is that not a great thing?
Well, it's not a great thing, one, because if they're putting it out to the public, it leaves it open for public opinion. And also, if there is an investigation, it could sway things in a way that it shouldn't. And it also, the third thing too, is that part of healing and part of getting to the other side, or the journey of this, of being sexually assaulted and raped, is being able to heal. And that's your story that you have to heal with. And that's not for anyone else to share. It's very private.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Prince. I want to, I'm sorry. Oh. I want to also pivot to something that's part of that topic, which is, if you find out that a friend has been victimized, what can you do to support them? Of course, not posting about their experience. That's one thing not to do, but what can you do affirmatively? I'm going to ask Smitha to address that topic.
All right, I have some more slides. So if somebody discloses to you that they've been sexually assaulted, there are a number of things that you can do. So of course you want to listen to them, right? You want to listen to their story without interruptions and just hear what they have to say, first of all. You want to, of course, validate to them, stress that it's not their fault, that you believe them, and that they are not alone. Unfortunately, we know some of these statistics where sexual assault is a very high number, and there are so many resources out there that we've talked about today, and so they are not alone and help is available. Be patient with them. Don't pressure them to do things they aren't ready to do yet. If they're not ready to call the police, that's fine. If they tell you that this has happened and they just want to sit and maybe watch a movie or go for a walk, that's fine. Do what they are ready to do. Don't make victim blaming statements, of course. Why did you go to that party? What did you do? Don't ever make those victim blaming statements. Nobody, absolutely nobody, should be sexually assaulted. ask what you can do for help, right? Instead of telling them, oh, you should call the police or let's go do this, ask them. They will be honest with you and just say, you know, I just want to tell you, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Or again, they may want to just kind of, they may say, can you call a hotline or the counselor with me? Do what they are ready to do. And know where to point someone for more help, a trusted adult, either a parent, a guardian, a teacher, a counselor, or of course, VASAP, where we've talked about a lot, the Montgomery County Sexual Assault Services Program. And then continue to check in with them. They may have told you something and then you know that they said they were going to talk to a counselor. Well, then check in with them the next week or the week after that. You know, just say, hey, wondering about what we talked about. I'd like to check in and see how you're doing. And of course, I want to end this with take care of yourself. It can be very hard to hear that something like this has happened to a friend. And so make sure you also take care of yourself.
Thank you so much, Smitha, for going over that. And I think, someone just posted in the chat, will victim blaming be covered more in depth? I think that there is a phenomenon surrounding victim blaming, and, we've seen that in national news. We see that happen locally. I've seen it happen in the cases that I've prosecuted where the victim is isolated and blamed. And I think it really circles back to what Dr. Prince was saying before. We want to wrap services around a survivor of sexual assault or sexual abuse and support them, and give them the tools that they need. And of course, to the extent possible, message around why that's not okay, and talk to communities and talk to all of you about why victim blaming is not okay. And it goes back to what Captain Dom said earlier, is that we believe victims. The numbers of false reports are so minuscule in comparison to the number of unfortunately truthful reports. And I think getting that messaging out there is really important. And I think, the Survivors at BCC account, all of you participating tonight, your education, the purpose of our, public service awareness contest that I mentioned earlier, all of these things are designed and intended to get that kind of education out there, that it is never okay to blame the victim, because what they're feeling is true. What they're feeling is true. That is the bottom line, and sort of where we started this conversation and where this conversation needs to continue. And all of you that are on this town hall tonight can be ambassadors of that information. It can be ambassadors of that message. And I know so many of you participate in the survivor account. So I think that, promoting that messaging and supporting each other is incredibly important and vital to changing any dynamic that is out there of victim blaming. Our community, our country, our schools, if there's any of that as in the culture, we need to shift away from that, and we need to be emphatic about that shift. And we try through our Choose Respect initiative to talk about that and to move forward, in away from any victim blaming, and to really condemn victim blaming. It's not acceptable at any time, at any point. I hope that answers the question. There's also, there's some other questions in the chat about this that I think we'll address later, because I want to make sure that we have time. One of the topics that we promised to cover tonight is sort of where we want to go next. And really, I'm going to turn to Captain Dom to sort of begin the conversation around this. And that's around posting naked photos. Whether you post them yourselves, whether you share them, whether you post someone else's photos, whether they get distributed without permission, whether they get compiled. This is a huge issue. And this is a huge issue, particularly right now during the pandemic, where electronic communication is at its highest amount that we've ever seen. Social media, YouTube videos, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, et cetera. I'm sure I'm leaving out really pertinent, important ways that teens are communicating right now. But this is an area of great concern, not only posting on those known social media areas, but also, on communication and websites and apps that are, let's just say, darker and can lead to even graver consequences. So I'm going to ask I'm going to ask Captain Dom and her team to address this.
So Debbie, one of the things that we did recently right after the Thanksgiving holiday is Montgomery County Police put out a press release regarding internet crimes against children. And this was one of the things that we talked about. And one of the things that we've noticed in our unit that handles this type of exploitation is that way back in April, our year-to-date cases and the tips that we had gotten had already surpassed last year in total. So at this point, we're about triple the caseload that we usually see. And we do link that directly to the pandemic. For whatever reason, I mean, obviously we all know we're all on the internet a lot more, but people are also using it completely inappropriately. So I reached out to the sergeant who handles this type of investigation specifically, and I asked him, Sergeant Rollins, what do you want people to know? So he provided a number of things that his investigators would like for people to know. The first thing is that any type of sharing is illegal when the person is under 18. It is illegal to produce or to share a nude photo of anyone under the age of 18, even if it's a self-produced photo. So even if the other individual takes a selfie of themselves and sends it to you, that could be considered child pornography. Even if you trust the person that you share this photo with, once it's been taken and it's out there, it basically lives on forever. Even between people who explicitly trust each other, there is the possibility that someone else will see this photo. They could inadvertently share it, or someone could look over their shoulder. So there's a number of different ways that other people could see this type of photo. And once it's been shared on social media, it's next to impossible to track everyone that has accessed or share it. Someone could take a picture of the screen, share it and save it that way, or save it and share it that way, and could be shared with hundreds of different people or people around the world, and there is no way to stop that information from getting out or to even track how many people have seen it. Parents, please talk to your children about the apps that they have. In many cases, you should have the passwords to their accounts. You should check them periodically to monitor their activity. Please talk to your children about taking pictures, nude pictures of themselves, about sharing nude pictures with other people, and that they shouldn't be asking for this type of picture from anyone else. The community can help too by discouraging other people to ask for or share this type of inappropriate content, whether it's nude pictures, whether it's sexual acts. It should not be taken, it should not be shared. And again, once it is taken, it can be shared around the world. It's very, very hard to stop or remove anything on the internet once it's out there. Even if the photo isn't misused, it could trigger what's called a cyber tip, which comes back down through the state of Maryland to our unit, and the individuals involved could still be charged with producing or distributing or possessing child pornography. It's really important to understand that is always a possibility when we're talking about nude photos of anyone under the age of 18. And again, once it's out there, we can't take it back. Friends, bystanders, community members, be on the lookout for this type of activity. Try to avoid it, report it. If you see that a nude image is being passed around by your peers, report it to MCPS school administration. You can also report it as a cyber tip. And you should be discouraging this type of activity with your friends. Even if it's a friend that's taking the nude self-produced photo, those nude selfies, discourage people from taking and sharing that type of photograph. It's important to understand that anyone involved in taking these types of pictures or sharing these types of pictures with others could be subject to charges or having their phone seized until a forensic examination can be completed and the photos can be deleted. Sometimes this takes 6 months or more. And if the subject of a picture that is shared around the school, when you talk about a traumatic event and you talk about survivors, that absolutely has an impact on the survivors of these types of events. They should be seeking, or survivors, please, please, please seek help, seek therapy. Dr. Prince and her team will help you with this type of event as well. It's very common. This is, I joke a lot that I'm really happy that the internet really wasn't, I don't want to age myself, but the internet wasn't around when I was a kid. This happens so very often. You are not alone. And for the people who are sharing images like that, please understand that the consequences of sharing these types of images are absolutely devastating. So please discourage other people from taking them. Don't take them at all to begin with, and understand that once the imagery is out there, we can't get it back.
Yeah, and I would add, just from the perspective of the prosecution, if you are victimized in some way by someone sharing your photos, please don't be afraid to come forward and get help. We're going to look at each case individually. It's someone who is the victim of a photo being shared and sent around is not someone that we're interested in prosecuting. So I just wanted to say that if you before you heard this discussion tonight and thought it was okay to share a picture here and there with your significant other, because we know that happens, like, we're not naive, and you did that, but then you broke up, and that person then shares it with 15 people who share it with 15 people who share it with 15 people. Please get help. Please come forward. I don't want people to be afraid that they're going to be prosecuted under those circumstances. That would be a highly, highly irregular and unusual situation. So, there actually are criminal offenses for something called sextortion, using photos. It's not just child pornography, it's also using those photos and circulating them in order to harm the person in that explicit photo. So that's who we're going to be looking at, is the person that sought to harm someone else. That's who we're going to be looking at for a criminal prosecution. So, please get help, please get support. You can reach out to VASAP, you can reach out to the Family Justice Center, you can, to your private therapist. There are text lines and, hotlines and anonymous places that you can call, sort of from the comfort of your home, call or text. And, we want to be able to help you with those things as well, and to not be afraid, of coming forward under those circumstances. So, I think, Captain Dom talked about sort of one of the questions that was posed, which was, what should you do if you see a friend that has been bullied, through photograph sharing, or really just bullied electronically, or the target of inappropriate posts or pictures on social media. What do you do? What do you as a student do under those circumstances? Who do you alert? Who do you tell? And I think this goes back to what Dr. Prince was saying. There is no wrong door. You can talk to someone at the school, you can talk to, a counselor, you can talk to a trusted adult in the school, a coach, a teacher that you trust, the SRO, if that's someone that you have a trusting relationship. A trusted adult is someone that you would go to share that information. If you or a friend, or if anyone, that if you're seeing these trends that are out there. Dr. Prince, do you have other things to add on that topic?
I think you covered it very well. Just making sure that you do get help. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to go at it alone. We're here to help.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Smitha, if you could just, as we're talking about sort of the topic of, we talked about how to help a friend, but this is more about, how can you, intervene's not the right word, but how can you, as a bystander to sexual assault, or as a bystander to nude photograph sharing or bullying or sextortion, what can you do? And I'm going to ask Smitha to cover that topic.
Yes, and I saw in the chat, somebody asked if there's a resource list for where we can go. And so I just wanted to really quickly share this. These are the services in Montgomery County, the ones that we've been talking about today. So VASAP, Dr. Prince, do you want to go over what's listed here for VASAP?
So here it talks about some of the services that we offer. We have the 24-hour hotline, which has been advertised through the chat, where you could call at any time and there's a therapist to talk to. We also have an outreach program where if you're going after a sexual assault for the forensic exam or to get medical attention, we provide advocates to accompany to the hospital for sex assaults and domestic violence forensic exams. We also have victim advocates when you're thinking you may want to report that can help coordinate that and also accompany you to the stations when that needs to occur. And we're still doing all of this in some capacity during the pandemic. We have individual and group counseling as well as psychiatry. We have victim compensation, which is a fund that is there to help pay for medical bills or anything that's lost as a result of being victimized. And we do offer some community education and to the community and to the schools. I don't know if we're going to talk about later how we coordinate with the schools. I can save that for later. I could say it now.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I don't know if you all know, but for every school cluster in Montgomery County, there's a therapist from our program assigned, and they hold groups. Sometimes they have sessions with clients. They respond to crisis situations when needed. For the BCC cluster, we have assigned, her name is Cara Aderola, just so that everyone knows the name. So if you needed to let the nurse know or the counselor that she to reach out to her to help, you can say, I need an advocate or a therapist to talk to from the Victim Assistance and Sexual Assault Program, and we respond. And that's one way that we collaborate with MCPS, and we've been doing that for over 40 years. So we're here.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Prince.
Thank you,
Samantha,
Dr.
do you want
Prince.
to talk about the Family Justice Center?
Yes, so VASAP deals with sexual assault, and then the Family Justice Center works with victims of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and dating violence. So as we know, part of dating violence can include definitely sexual assault. So the Family Justice Center can work with anybody over the 16 and over with safety planning, which basically means how can you keep yourself safe? We would walk with you through listening to your story and thinking of ways to keep yourself safe, whether that means taking a different way to school or making sure that that other person's not in your class. Obviously, things are a little bit different right now with COVID, but that's what safety planning includes. And then we would also provide counseling. We partner with VASAP and the Abused Persons Program, along with other nonprofits to provide counseling. And then for everybody, but if you are under the age of 18, this is where you would need parental consent. We can help with peace orders if you're under the age of 18, or protective orders. And we also work very closely with the state's attorney's office and the police if you'd like to bring charges. And again, both of these programs, I can't reiterate this enough, both of these programs are completely free and they are victim-centered. We are going to do what you are ready to do. If you come in one day and say, I just want to talk to somebody, great. If you come 2 weeks later and say, you know what, I want to take out a peace order, or I want to report this to the police, fine. We are going to be there for you every step of the way, even if it's not all at one time. So I wanted to then now quickly go over some bystander intervention. And so I wanted to first talk about sexual harassment. If you're, hanging out with friends, or a classmate or a friend harasses somebody else, what can you do? Whether or not you know the harasser, you can intervene by telling them in a respectful, in a direct and honest way that their words or actions are not okay. So you can say things as simple as, hey, that's not cool, or stop it, or why would you say that? You calling them out makes them realize that that's not an okay thing to do. In addition to the person that's being harassed, let them know that what just happened is not their fault and affirm that they did not do anything wrong. That could mean, I saw what they just did to you. Are you okay? Checking in with them. I heard what that person said to you. I am so sorry. These are ways to help the person being harassed feel like, okay, you know what? I'm not alone in this. Somebody else also knows that this is wrong and that I didn't do anything wrong. For sexual assaults, if you are with people at a party, at a friend's house, and you notice something is going on and something's just not right, if somebody is trying to convince somebody to go up to a bedroom, or if they're bothering them a lot, what are some things you can do? First, you could create a distraction. You might be worried that this person's talking to somebody and that person looks really uncomfortable. Interrupt the situation. Right? Say, hey, you know what? I think you're in my math class. Let's, talk about what's going on there. Or do you want to go get something to eat with me? Or, maybe start a new activity or bring food to the person. Create some sort of distraction to get that person away from the other person. Ask directly. Talk to the person who you might think is in trouble. Who did you come here with? Are you okay being alone with that person? Do you want me to stick around? Let them know that you're there in case they do feel uncomfortable. Refer to an authority. If there's an authority figure there, like a parent or another adult, reach out to them. That's fine. If there's not that and you are thinking that somebody is in danger, it's okay to call 911. And it can be intimidating to approach that situation alone, so enlist others, right? There's power in numbers. Get another person to help you out. Say if you know that that person has another friend at the party, maybe go up to them and say, hey, you know what? I think you might need to check in on your friend. So this is called the care, right? Create a distraction, ask directly, refer to an authority, and enlist others. So these are just some ways that you could be a bystander, that you don't only have to help somebody that's a friend, you can help somebody who's a stranger, you can help somebody that's an acquaintance. And just remember that your words and your actions do matter and that they do make a difference.
And I think, Smitha, that's a really good, a good connection to something that was just being posted in the chat about individuals being pressured by, victimized through peer pressure. And I think that it's this education and these conversations that are going to hopefully begin to minimize that type of behavior. I mean, again, I'm not unrealistic to think that that's not going to still continue, but our joint knowledge and your knowledge on these topics and your ability to support your friends, to support your community, to be those ambassadors, to not be a bystander, to intervene in a safe way when you can. Those things are going to be what changes the culture.
And I just wanted,
at the end of the day.
And I just wanted to add that I know a lot right now we're not gathering in groups, and so it seems to be hard doing that bystander intervention. You can do that on social media. You can do that through technology. If somebody posts some sort of joke that alludes to sexual harassment or sexual assault, or if somebody criticizes somebody for something that happened, you can also call them out on social media. And again, that's the power in numbers. And I will say that the winner of the video contest last year and the one that you all voted as fan favorite, that's exactly what that was about. It was about somebody being criticized because she was sexually assaulted. Oh, well, what was she wearing? What did she expect? What did she think would happen? And then there were other messages of, wait a minute, that's not okay. It doesn't matter what she was wearing. She didn't do anything wrong. What about him? And you all voted that as the fan favorite. So that's a great example of what you can do. And I'll put the link to that video in the chat if any of you would like to see that again.
And you can see all of the winning videos from basically a bunch of years past, all on the Choose Respect website. All of that information is maintained there, and they're all YouTube videos that you can check out and utilize them in your education, circulate them, send them to your friends, post around these issues. There's power in that, as you all, again, certainly know better than I do, as an adult, what goes on social media really can have an impact, and can change the conversation. And we're hoping that, all of you on this town hall tonight are going to be those conversation changers, are going to take this information and move it forward. And, and we're here to provide more information after tonight if you want to. And again, that's why we're going to go through the questions. I'm trying to incorporate some of them as we go, but it's a little challenging to get to all of the questions. Lieutenant Ormsby.
I'm sorry, Debbie, I don't have a question for you.
I saw a hand raised. I guess that might have been just an inadvertent hand raised. I was trying to.
It certainly was.
Okay, great.
I was trying to give a thumbs up, but I did a clap or something.
Awesome. Well, I want to, we had made, sort of had a list of things that we wanted to talk about tonight, and we still have a few that I want to make sure that we at least touch on, and then again, we can continue the conversation. One of those things is just touching for a moment on the issue of uncomfortable comments or interactions with adults, and potentially grooming, stalking, suggestive comments, that sort of thing. So we've talked a little bit about child abuse and a sexual touching or something physical that may happen. There's also sexual exploitation that an adult can perpetrate on a child. Inappropriate letters, inappropriate comments, emails, postings on social media, inappropriate conversations on your Instagram Messenger or whatever, any ways of communication. Those can all be sexual exploitation that can be illegal under the law. There's a recent case in Maryland where a teacher was writing disturbing letters, to say the least, to a child in one of his classes. And that teacher had never actually physically touched that child, but the content of the letter was sexual in nature, and it was designed for the teacher's really sexual gratification and benefit. That's illegal. An adult cannot do that where a child is concerned. Grooming, it can be even something more subtle than that. It can be an adult befriending a teen, ingratiating themselves to that teen, setting up a private text exchange between just them. Let's not share any of this. Let's talk just between the two of us. I've seen so many child abuse cases that start out with an adult starting to have conversations about the sex life of the teenager. They want to be their confidant. They want to, have these conversations. I'll tell you how to do it. I'll be your support. And it's again, conversation that A, can be illegal, or B, can lead to something illegal. And those are sort of those sexually exploitive things, and they can just be words. And I think that those are things to keep in mind. If something doesn't feel right, that is another place where you may want to walk through one of those doors that Dr. Prince talked about. Talk to a trusted adult. It can be someone within the school system. It can be someone at VASAP. It can be someone at the Family Justice Center. It can be the private therapist. All these different doors that we talked about before. Talk to someone. If something doesn't feel right, in all likelihood, it's not right. And at the bottom line is, if it doesn't feel okay to you, it's not right for you. And that's why it's so important to share that information. Because we see this with, unfortunately, I've seen it where coaches, teachers, and again, it's the teachers with an MCPS, let me be clear, that is a tiny, tiny percentage of the cases that we see and that we prosecute, but certainly other people in positions of trust, swim coaches, your sports teams, music lessons, those kinds of things, where someone is in care and custody of a child, again, anyone under the age of 18, that is inappropriate and it may be criminal. And if it doesn't feel right, please talk to a trusted adult. I'm going to ask Captain Dom if there are things that you want to add on the issue of grooming or of sort of this inappropriate conduct. And then I'm going to ask either Dr. Mooney or Mr. Edmondson to sort of address how MCPS addresses those when they get information about potential grooming.
So Debbie, I think that what you said really hit it on the head, right? If it doesn't feel right and it's not right for you, it's not okay. When we talk about some of these grooming comments, they could go on for years before there's any type of inappropriate act or specific contact between the two parties. We want to be able to stop that from happening. So if these comments are being made, please come forward. If we're not at a point yet where we can make a criminal case, that certainly doesn't mean that we can't connect you with services or that you can't seek services even if you don't come to the police department first. It is so important to be respectful of what you're feeling inside. And if something isn't right, it's not right. And we want to get you the help that you need and that you deserve. So keep those things in mind. Sergeant Sudd, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just want to say that just talk to someone. I think that's the first step. And all of us, all the services, the police department, I as a supervisor, all the detectives, we believe you and we'll do whatever we can. And what you want to happen is our priority. So.
Then I'll turn it over to MCPS.
So the first thing, I put this in the chat earlier, but I just want to make sure. So MCPS staff, all MCPS staff have annual training on recognizing and reporting child abuse and neglect. And that's something that we do take very seriously. And one of those modules, or some parts of those modules, are about recognizing grooming, recognizing any of those inappropriate activities that might be taking place, in hopes that as adults in the room who are interacting with children, that we're able to help intervene a little more quickly. But in terms of if those situations are reported to us, we do go immediately kind of through a protocol. I engage with Mr. Edmondson's office and with my director, and we talk about what we need to do to investigate it, what we need to do to make sure that the student is safe, and how we proceed from there. And from a central level, I'll let Mr. Edmondson talk about kind of where things go beyond that. But we immediately, if something's reported, we take it seriously and start the investigation on our side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the training involves specific details around grooming, of emotional grooming, where you may have, and again, it's not just MCPS employees, but you may have an adult in the child's life who is manipulating in a way to help the student think or feel that they're developing an intimate relationship, even more so than the professional or even just neighborly level. You have behavioral grooming. We're encouraging students into activities that might get the students into trouble or make them feel responsible for something. And then the adult comes in and says, well, I'll take care of it and I'll help you. And so that it builds, again, that kind of emotional piece to it. Community grooming is another type of grooming that we really talk specifically and train our staff on. And of course, that physical grooming with the unacceptable touches versus acceptable touches. A couple of years ago, we implemented pre-K through 12 personal body safety lessons. And so every year our students through our counseling program are exposed to our PBSL personal body safety lessons so that they are aware of, as Captain Dom said, what should feel right and what shouldn't, and how you should report that to a trusted adult, either within the school system or at home or somebody at another part of their life. I think we really encourage our staff to focus on social emotional learning. We encourage our staff to have positive relationships with our kids. We know research says that the more you understand students, the better they learn, and the stronger relationship that you have with them, the better they learn, and the stronger the program. But there's obviously there's a well-established line, and we have protocols and policies in place. This is right along the lines of child abuse and neglect. So any type of incident or report where we have grooming involved, we not only contact our employee engagement and relationship side, which is, you might recognize Michael Simmons and Sherwin Collette in their office, who handle our employee investigations. But obviously we're going to contact Child Protective Services and Child Welfare as a part of this as well. So we take each of these cases as seriously as any other, and we want to make sure that students understand, if you're in a situation where you, again, don't feel right about, let somebody know.
And I think, one of the things also that I think it's important to understand, so if there is a complaint, and I didn't mean to sort of skip over the fact that there have been, and I'm sure there will be, members, the people that work for MCPS, whether they're teachers, paraeducators, coaches after school, who may sexually abuse a child. We know that individuals who are pedophiles seek out positions where they can build relationships of trust with children. That's just statistically and research-based. We know that that's what happens. So what happens if you feel uncomfortable about something that happens in school, or if there's something that you believe might be grooming or something that's not okay? I think this goes back to, and now I'm blanking on who said this earlier. I think it might have been Mr. Evanson, that if you don't get an answer that you like with the first person that you go to, you keep raising that issue if you feel comfortable, or you get that trusted adult to help advocate for you if you weren't comfortable pushing it forward. We meet on a regular basis, my office, the police, and MCPS, to discuss cases that involve MCPS staff. If there are concerns, and we talk about those, and we talk about there are active cases right now that my division is prosecuting that involve people that work for MCPS, either part-time or full-time, and that have perpetrated sexual abuse. Those cases they're child abuse cases. They're child abuse cases just like other cases, and we are investigating them to the fullest, but we are also working with MCPS to dig deeper and see if there are other issues. Press releases go out. We look back in that employee's file, and we try to figure out, are there other things that we missed? How can we do better collectively as a team? And that is an ongoing, constant conversation, again, because of what I said, which is, we know that people seek out these jobs to get close to kids. And so no one, any of those allegations are taken seriously and investigated and discussed among our multidisciplinary team. So I just want to be clear about that as well. Sergeant Suh.
And if I could just add one piece, is we don't believe that the compliance training that all of our employees are mandated to complete. I mean, the purpose of that training isn't to stop the evil in someone's heart, right? So, I mean, there are bad people out there, and we go through our human resources department is exceptional, and they go through multiple different levels and layers of screening before we hire someone. But what the training does do is it helps the 99.999% of the other employees identify it and help with their antennas to pop up if they feel like, wait a minute, that's not right, or I'm uncomfortable for this student. And so we want our adults to know what the reporting process is as well. So that's the purpose of our compliance training. It's not to say, we hired you, you took the training, why did you behave this way? It's the rest of us understand what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it can be like, so that we can get help fast.
And so that also so that the community, and this training is also, we also have training, MCPS has training for every volunteer that comes in as well, so that you can be educated and know what to do if you see it, so that you can intervene as a bystander. I mean, that's why we all want to be armed with that information. Sergeant, so did you have something to add?
I just want to add that if a case comes to me or the other supervisor where there's a teacher, a coach, babysitter, someone who has daily interactions with kids, or even police officer or church, daycare, those cases it's black and white. It's going to be assigned. It's going to be looked into because we are concerned, and it's our primary goal to keep the reporting victim and also any other potential victims. So it's kind of black and white. Those will always be assigned. So that's all I want to say.
Sergeant. Thank you, Sergeant. I want to take a moment before we conclude. I wanted Devlin to share some of the student task forces and committees that are being created to address some of these issues. And Devlin, if you could share that, and thank you for being such an excellent advocate and leader for your peers on this subject matter.
Of course, I was going to share 2 resources from the county student government regarding transparency in the MCPS reporting process. So the first one is a forum from Youth for Equity, which is a BCC student group, and the forum is about experiences reporting or not reporting incidents of discrimination or sexual misconduct. It's optional and different from making a report, and it's again run by a student organization. So I'll put that in the chat, and then the second thing I'll put in the chat is a sign up for task forces regarding sexual misconduct policy reforms, working in collaboration with the Board of Education and MCPS, as Mr. Edmondson actually earlier mentioned. And those 4 committees, the first is helping the county rewrite the policy for handling sexual misconduct and violence. And the second is a group of students working to build a sexual misconduct training for students that will function separately from a new health curriculum. The third is creating a teacher training for sexual misconduct. And the fourth is a group of students that will create a website and an app to make reporting misconduct, bullying, and identity-based harassment simpler for students. So I will put those 2 links in the chat.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Devlin. That's amazing. You know, we had we had wanted to share some information specifically for parents, how to recognize possible signs, in your kids or your kids' friends. What conversations do parents need to have? We have about 5 minutes left. We've really been trying to, address things that are coming up in the chat and kind of multitask a little bit here. I don't want to not do justice to this topic, but Smitha, can I ask you maybe just to give a few highlights and a few significant points related to what a parent may want to know? And we can share these, Smitha, you're on, we can share these slides with Lyric to have them circulated as well. So whatever we aren't able to delve into tonight, we'll have those slides circulated.
Yes, absolutely. So here are some signs that somebody may have been sexually assaulted. So looking for these signs in your children or in your children's friends: unusual weight gain or weight loss, unhealthy eating patterns, signs of physical abuse such as bruises or scratches, them maybe having a sexually transmitted infection, signs of depression, anxiety, or worry. Their grades may be decreasing. They may not be taking care of themselves in terms of hygiene or the way they used to dress. You may see that they have started having self-harming behaviors or expressing thoughts of suicide or suicidal behavior, and also drinking and drug use. So all of these, of course, this isn't the list that says, if they have 4 of these things, then they have been sexually assaulted, but these are very common behaviors that somebody may start to do if they have been sexually assaulted. And then really quickly, how to talk to your children. So use the media to make it relevant. I mean, there are stories on shows and movies, songs on the radio, or songs on whatever streaming service that people listen to songs.
Use the T video that doesn't have profanity in it, for example.
Exactly. Use that to start a conversation, to say, hey, let's talk about what that was about. Talk to them about what consent is. Again, show the better video, or talk to them about what consent is or what consent isn't. Use your own experience to tell a safety story. It doesn't have to be a story specifically about sexual assault or harassment, but some story that has to do with safety and what you did to make yourself safe or how you reached out for help. And then talk about sexual assault directly, right? Make sure that they know what sexual assault is, what consent is, and they may have learned misconceptions from the media or from their friends. A lot of times people still think a sexual assault is somebody jumping out of the bushes with a knife. The proportion of people who know the perpetrator of sexual assault is so high. So usually letting them know that usually there's no way a rapist looks, but it's probably somebody that somebody knows. So these are all, again, just really introductory ideas of how you can talk to your child about sexual assault.
Can I add just a few things really quick too?
Please, Dr. Prince.
Please.
It's a great idea too for parents to take the time to talk to their children. Find out what's going on with them. Set aside, I know it's a crazy kind of world right now, and we're all, some of us are teleworking, and then you have all this school stuff going on online, but take the time to talk to your kids and find out what's going on. And if they need help, give them the help that they need and believe them.
And I would also say
Absolutely.
that there are some great national resources too. If you don't know how to start that conversation, RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest Network, or the National Dating Violence Hotline, they're also there to help you start those conversations. You can also contact myself, you can contact Dr. Prince if you have questions of how to start that conversation with your child.
I want to, we're coming to an end here, and in terms of our time, I want to just make one last comment. And this is something that I've been thinking about. Sometimes when an investigation is initiated or a report comes out, or we're looking into things that are on different survivor accounts, the community may not always know what's happening behind the scenes, whether it's MCPS working on it, my office, the police. It may not be public. And if there's not an arrest at the end of it, you may never know what remediation happened. You may never know what actions were happening behind the scenes. And I think that's really hard to say, but it's also just the reality, because there's so many privacy concerns, as we talked about at the beginning. I just want people to kind of be aware of that. I was talking about that earlier with Dr. Mooney, and I know that that's just a challenge, I think, for all of us. We want to be able to be as transparent as possible, but we also want to protect the survivors. And so I think that that's a really important thing to think about. And, we've shared a lot tonight about the reporting process, what happens, but the biggest takeaway, and we said this at the beginning and we're going to say it in the end, is if something doesn't feel right to you, if something doesn't seem right, if you feel that you've been assaulted, harassed, anything, please seek help. You are not alone. There are so many resources to help you. And I really appreciate and want to thank my colleagues who presented this evening, and also Lyric and Devlin for making this happen tonight, and for giving us the opportunity to share this information with all of you. Because as I've said multiple times, having these conversations is what cultivates a better culture, if you will. And it's important for all of us to engage in this dialogue. So thank you again to Lyric and Devlin.
Well, thank you to everyone here. I know that 2 hours is a really long time, especially after a really long day. And we're so grateful that you shared so many thoughts and expertise, and just we're so appreciative. And I'm sure there will be follow-up, but we really want everybody to know that, there are supports available for you. You can get help, and we are, nobody here is turning their back on anybody who has been a victim, who is a survivor, and that is the reason why we have done this. And we wanted to make sure it was addressed, and we do not want you to feel alone, because you are not. It is a large community. So thank you very, very much to everyone. Be safe, be well. And again, we'll be following up. If you have questions, you can reach out to anybody here. You can always reach out to me. The Google form also for questions is still open. And we will move this forward in terms of other resources and other outlets. But thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you so much for the time that our presenters took. I mean, they have incredibly busy work lives, and I really can't stress enough what a gift this was for them to devote this much time to our community and to this topic. We're truly grateful. So thank you.